The rain came down in sheets over forks, the kind of relentless downpour that turned the forest into something alive and breathing. Water drummed against cedar bark and pooled in the moss, turning the ground into a sponge that swallowed sound. Most nights the woods were empty except for deer and the occasional hiker foolish enough to ignore the weather warnings. Tonight the forest held something else. 3 figures moved through the trees with unnatural grace, their pale skin catching what little moonlight pierced the clouds. Nomads. Vampires without territory, without the self-control that came from centuries of practice. They'd been drawn to the Olympic Peninsula by rumor, by the scent of something different, something that didn't belong to the Volturi's carefully ordered world. The tallest one, a male with matted hair the color of dried blood, tilted his head back and inhaled. His throat worked as he processed the information carried on the wet air. "There," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Half a mile east. 2 of them." The others didn't need further instruction. They'd been hunting together long enough to move as one unit, cutting through the undergrowth without disturbing a single branch. Their existence depended on stealth, on taking what they needed before anyone noticed the pattern. Small towns were best. Places where a missing hiker or a drifter wouldn't raise alarms for days. They never heard him coming. The first shot tore through the rain like judgment itself, a sound so massive it seemed to crack the sky open. The lead nomad's head snapped back, a crater of silver appearing where his left eye had been. He staggered, confusion flooding what remained of his face. Vampires didn't bleed. Vampires didn't fall from bullets. He fell anyway. The second shot came before his body hit the ground, and this time the female nomad took it in the chest. The impact lifted her off her feet and slammed her into a Douglas fir hard enough to split the bark. She clawed at the wound, her fingers finding something that burned like holy water and liquid fire combined. The third nomad ran. Survival instinct overrode everything else, every lesson about standing together, every promise made in the dark. He became a blur of motion, pushing his vampiric speed to its limit, branches whipping past his face as he tore through the forest. He made it 30 yards before the shadows moved wrong. A figure stepped out from behind a tree that couldn't possibly have hidden him, materializing as if the darkness itself had taken shape and decided to walk. The nomad tried to change direction, but his momentum betrayed him. He crashed directly into the stranger's path and found himself looking up at a face that belonged in a museum, in a history book, in a nightmare. The man wore a long red coat that pooled around his boots, somehow untouched by the rain. His hair fell past his shoulders in black tangles, framing features too sharp to be called handsome. But it was his eyes that froze the nomad in place. They gleamed crimson in the darkness, old and cold, and infinitely amused. "Running." The stranger said, his accent thick and unfamiliar. European in a way that suggested centuries rather than decades. How predictable. The nomad opened his mouth to speak, to plead, to threaten. He never got the chance. The stranger raised his right hand, and the nomad saw the gun for the first time. Not the sleek, modern weapons humans carried, but something massive and angular, more cannon than pistol. The barrel was inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at. "Jackal," the stranger said almost fondly, as if introducing an old friend. 13 millimeter, mercury core blessed by Maxwell himself. He tilted his head, studying the nomad, like an entomologist examining a particularly boring insect. "I wonder if your kind burns the same way." The nomad lunged. It was pure desperation, the final gambit of something that knew it was already dead. His hands reached for the stranger's throat nails, extended like claws, moving fast enough to create afterimages in the rain. The stranger didn't dodge. He simply pulled the trigger. The sound was different this time, deeper, final. The nomad's chest exploded outward mercury, and blessed silver tearing through him like a holy scream made solid. He had time for one last thought, a fleeting confusion about what kind of creature could end his immortal existence so casually, before his body collapsed into ash that the rain immediately began washing away. The man in the red coat holstered his weapons with practiced ease, the castle sliding into its place on his left hip, the jackal finding home on his right. He stood there for a moment, head tilted, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut. "This town," he said to the empty forest, to the rain, to the darkness that seemed to lean in and listen. "It smells like secrets." Far away in a house perched on the edge of the forest, Alice Cullens' eyes snapped open. She'd been arranging flowers in the living room, her hands moving through the motions of normalcy, of pretending to be human. The vision hit her like a freight train, fragmentary and wrong. Rain, gunfire, red eyes that weren't theirs, a future that split and twisted in ways her gift had never encountered before. "Edward," she called, her voice tight. "We have a problem." In the forest, the man in the red coat turned and walked deeper into the trees, his footsteps making no sound on the soaked earth. Behind him, 3 piles of ash dissolved into nothing, washed clean by the relentless Pacific Northwest rain. And in the town of Forks, in a small police station lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed with tired electricity, Chief Charlie Swan picked up his phone on the 3rd ring. "Chief Swan," he said, already reaching for his jacket. On the other end, a resident reported hearing what sounded like explosions in the national forest. Hunters, probably, Charlie thought. Some idiot with more firepower than sense. He had no idea how right he was. The rain continued to fall, indifferent and eternal, washing away evidence, and bringing the scent of something old and dangerous into a town that thought it understood the meaning of those words. It didn't. Not yet. The vision wouldn't settle. Alice had experienced uncertainty before, futures that shifted with every human decision, paths that branched and rebranched like trees in a storm. But this was different. This was static, white noise in a system that had never failed her before. She stood in the Cullen living room, one hand pressed against the wall for balance while the family gathered around her. Jasper reached out instinctively, trying to calm the spike of anxiety radiating from her, but she shook her head. "Don't," she said quietly. "I need to feel this." Edward leaned forward, his topaz eyes intense with concentration. He'd been trying to read her thoughts for the past 5 minutes, following the fractured visions as they flickered through her consciousness. What he found there made his jaw tighten. "Guns," he said finally, "but not modern ones. And the shooter, he's not—" He stopped, struggling for words. Alice finished for him. "I can't see him clearly. Every time I focus, the future splits. It's like looking at someone through broken glass, except the glass keeps rearranging itself." She closed her eyes, reaching for the vision again. 3 nomads entered our territory 2 hours ago. They're gone now. Eliminated. But the method, it was so loud, so visible. Whoever did this doesn't care about secrecy. Carlyle stood near the window, his expression troubled. In 3 centuries of careful existence, he'd built his life on discretion, on maintaining the thin membrane between their world and the human one. The thought of someone operating so brazenly in their territory sent warning bells through his mind. "We should investigate," Emmett said, already moving toward the door. "If there's a new player in town, we need to know what we're dealing with." "No." Edward's voice cut through the room with unexpected force. "Alice is right to be concerned. Whoever this is, they're fundamentally different. I caught the edge of a thought earlier tonight near the forest boundary, just for a second before they moved out of range. And Rosalie prompted, her arms crossed. Edward's throat worked as he searched for the right description. It was like standing next to a mass grave. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once, all dying at once. But underneath it, something aware. Something that knew I was listening. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jasper finally broke it. We're not the only supernatural presence in Forks. The wolves prove that. Maybe this is another tribe's guardian, someone with different methods. The Quileute would have told us, Carlyle said. Our treaty is specific. Any new guardian would require consultation. A knock at the door interrupted the discussion. Not the tentative tap of a human visitor, but a deliberate announcement. 3 measured strikes that somehow managed to sound both polite and mocking. The Cullens exchanged glances. No one approached their home uninvited. No one human could navigate the private road without invitation, and no vampire would be foolish enough to knock. Carlyle moved to answer, but Edward held up a hand. I can't hear him, he said, and there was something like fear in his voice. He's standing right outside, and I can't hear a single thought. The knock came again. Patient, inevitable. Carlyle opened the door. The man on the porch was tall and angular, his presence seeming to take up more space than his physical form warranted. He wore the same red coat from Alice's fractured visions, though now she could see details her gift had missed. The fabric was old, expensive, maintained with the care of someone who viewed it as armor rather than fashion. Rain beaded on the surface and rolled off without leaving a trace. But it was his face that held her attention. Pale, yes, but not with their marble perfection. His pallor spoke of crypts and coffins of things that should have stayed buried. And his eyes, crimson bright, ancient, swept across the assembled Cullens with the lazy interest of a predator that had already decided the deer weren't worth the chase. Good evening, he said, his accent rendering the simple greeting into something formal and slightly dangerous. I hope I'm not intruding. Though given the circumstances, I believe we have matters to discuss. Carlyle's composure never wavered, though Alice felt Jasper's tension spike beside her. Please come in. I'm Dr. Carlyle Cullen. This is my family. The stranger stepped across the threshold with a fluid motion that was almost but not quite a glide. He looked around the room, taking in the expensive furniture, the carefully curated art, the trappings of a life spent pretending to be human. How civilized, he murmured. How very domesticated. He turned his attention back to Carlyle, and something like genuine curiosity flickered in those red eyes. You've built something remarkable here. A vampire who heals humans. A family that hunts animals instead of their natural prey. Tell me, Doctor, does the cage ever chafe? Edward moved forward, positioning himself between the stranger and the rest of the family. Who are you? The man in the red coat smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. A guest for the moment. A problem perhaps depending on how the next few days unfold. He inclined his head in a gesture that might have been a bow several centuries ago. You may call me Alucard. The name hung in the air like smoke. Alice tried to grasp at the futures it spawned, but they kept slipping away, replaced by others, an endless cascade of possibilities that her gift couldn't parse. You killed 3 vampires in the forest tonight, Carlyle said. It wasn't a question. Nomads, Alucard corrected gently. Careless ones. They were hunting humans on your territory. I assumed you'd prefer I handled it before they attracted attention. He glanced at Edward. Though it seems I attracted attention anyway. My apologies. Discretion has never been my strongest virtue. Jasper's hand moved to his side, an old habit from his time in the Southern Wars. Those were gunshots. Regular bullets don't kill our kind. Regular bullets do. Alucard reached into his coat, and every vampire in the room tensed. But he only produced a single cartridge, holding it up to the light. The casing gleamed silver, inscribed with symbols that made Alice's eyes water. Blessed silver, mercury core, melted down from church relics and reforged with very specific intentions. I find they work quite efficiently. Rosalie studied him with cool assessment. You're not like us. You're stronger, older. But you're not Volturi either. Observant. Alucard pocketed the bullet. No, I am not part of your Italian bureaucracy. My organization operates under different auspices, serves different masters. He met Carlyle's gaze directly. I am here on assignment, Doctor. There are forces moving in the Pacific Northwest that concern my employers. Demonic activity, rogue, supernatural elements. The kind of things that threaten the veil between worlds. The Volturi won't like an outside operator in their territory, Edward said quietly. The Volturi, Alucard replied, do not own the world regardless of what they believe. They maintain order among vampires, admirable in its way. But my jurisdiction is broader and considerably less political. Carlyle gestured to the seating area. Perhaps we should sit down. If you're going to be operating in forks, we need to establish some understanding. Alucard considered this, then nodded. Very well. I appreciate the attempt at diplomacy. He moved to one of the armchairs and settled into it with the ease of someone who'd been sitting in similar furniture for centuries. Though I should warn you, Doctor, understanding me may prove more difficult than you anticipate. As he spoke, Edward caught another fragment, a whisper from the maelstrom that was Alucard's mind. It wasn't words so much as impression, battlefield stretching back through centuries, the taste of blood and gunpowder, and underneath it all, a bone-deep weariness wrapped around something that might have been amusement. Edward pulled back from the contact, his skin paler than usual. Alice touched his arm in concern, but he shook his head minutely. Not now. Carlyle took a seat across from their guest, his posture open but alert. Then help us understand. What brings someone like you to a small town in Washington? Alucard's smile returned sharp as a knife's edge. The same thing that brought you here, I imagine. The desire to be left alone. The hope that distance might provide peace. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. Though in my case, peace is merely the interval between assignments. And this particular assignment requires I remain in the area for the foreseeable future. Hunting demons? Rosalie asked skeptically. Among other things. Your world has more layers than you realize, more things that lurk in the spaces between what humans believe and what they ignore. I clean up the messes. I eliminate the threats. I serve a purpose. His eyes glinted. Much like you, Doctor, though my methods are considerably less gentle. A phone rang, shattering the tension. Carlyle excused himself, stepping into the next room. They could all hear him anyway. Vampire hearing ensured privacy was mostly theoretical, but the gesture was polite. Alice used the moment to focus on Alucard again, trying to force her gift to work. The futures remained fractured, but she caught glimpses. Volterra, the Volturi guard. Jane's face twisted in something that might have been frustration or fear. And through it all, this stranger in red walking through scenarios that should have ended in his destruction and emerging untouched. Carlyle returned his expression carefully neutral. That was the hospital. There's been an incident near the reservation boundary. A hiker found injured claiming to have seen large wolves in the forest. Alucard stood smoothly. How inconvenient. I trust your treaty with the local shapeshifters is still intact. The casual knowledge made Edward's eyes narrow. How do you know about the Quileute? I make it a point to understand the supernatural ecology before I begin work. Shapeshifters, vampires. The occasional genuine werewolf, if one is unlucky. All part of the same hidden world, all operating under the assumption that humans are too blind to notice. Alucard moved toward the door. A reasonable assumption usually, though recent events may test that theory. Wait, Carlyle said. If you're going to be in Forks, we need to establish protocols. The Volturi have very strict rules about exposure. I'm aware of their rules, Doctor. I've dealt with regulatory bodies before, some with more teeth than your Volturi, some with considerably less. Alucard paused at the threshold. But I appreciate your concern. It speaks well of you. Few of our kind retain such compassion after the first century. Our kind, Edward challenged. Alucard glanced back over his shoulder, and for just a moment, something flickered in his expression. Not quite human, not quite anything else. Old, tired, amused. Monsters, boy. The things that go bump in the night. The predators who pretend to be people. He smiled, and it was the saddest thing Alice had seen in decades. We all wear different masks, but underneath we're variations on the same theme. Some of us have simply stopped pretending the mask is our face. He left without another word, disappearing into the rain-soaked night as if he'd never been there at all. The Cullens stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Emmett spoke. Well, that was unsettling. He's dangerous, Edward said quietly. More dangerous than anything we've encountered, including the Volturi. Carlyle moved to the window, watching the darkness where Alucard had vanished. Perhaps. But he's also principled in his way. Did you notice he could have simply eliminated the nomads and left? Instead, he came here, introduced himself, tried to establish communication. He's playing with us, Rosalie countered. Showing off. Proving he can walk right into our home without us being able to stop him. Maybe, Alice said softly. Or maybe he's lonely. They all turned to look at her. She met their stares with quiet certainty. I saw it in the fragments I could catch. He's been alive for a very long time. Long enough that everything becomes a game because the alternative is going mad from boredom. She wrapped her arms around herself. He came here to warn us, yes. But also because we're the first interesting thing he's encountered in decades. Jasper moved to her side, offering silent support. Can you see what he'll do next? Alice closed her eyes, reaching for her gift. The futures swirled and reformed, still chaotic, but with slightly more definition than before. He's going to keep hunting, she said finally. Whatever he's tracking, it's bigger than a few nomad vampires. And the Volturi are going to notice. Soon. In the forest, miles away, Alucard stood in the rain and let it wash over him. He'd been truthful with the Cullens, more or less. The assignment was real. The threats were real. But he hadn't mentioned the other reason he'd chosen to introduce himself. Boredom was a slow poison for creatures like him, and the doctor's family, with their golden eyes and earnest attempts at humanity, represented something he hadn't seen in centuries. Hope, perhaps, or its pale shadow. Either way, it would be interesting to watch it break. He smiled at the darkness and continued walking the Casole and Jackal resting easy at his hips, ready for whatever the night would bring. Bella Swan had lived in Forks long enough to recognize the particular quality of silence that followed violence. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a sleeping town or the peaceful hush of falling snow. This was the silence of people holding their breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She noticed it first in the cafeteria. The usual buzz of conversation felt muted, strained. Students clustered in tighter groups than normal, their voices dropping to whispers whenever anyone passed. Jessica Stanley, who normally couldn't keep a secret if her life depended on it, kept glancing toward the windows as if expecting something to burst through the glass. "Did you hear?" Angela whispered, leaning across the lunch table. "They're saying it was some kind of explosion in the national forest." 3 different people reported hearing it. Mike Newton shook his head. "My dad said it was probably illegal fireworks. Left over from New Year's." "In March." Angela raised an eyebrow. "And the Forest Service found evidence of like a fight or something. Broken trees, disturbed ground." Bella kept her expression neutral, but her stomach tightened. She glanced toward the Cullen table where Edward sat with his siblings in their usual isolated cluster. He met her gaze for just a moment, and the tension in his jaw told her everything she needed to know. Something had happened. Something the Cullens were worried about. The day dragged on with the weight of unanswered questions. By the time the final bell rang, Bella was ready to corner Edward and demand explanations. But when she reached the parking lot, she found Charlie's cruiser idling near her truck. Her father rolled down the window, his expression weary. "Hey, kiddo. Need to talk to you for a minute." Bella's heart sank. Charlie in his official capacity was never a good sign. She walked over, hugging her jacket against the drizzle. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly." Charlie rubbed his face, a gesture she recognized from late nights and difficult cases. "Just want to make sure you're being careful. Staying out of the woods after dark." "I always am, Dad." I know. It's just we've had some unusual activity lately. Probably nothing, but I'd rather be safe." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You haven't noticed anything strange around the Cullens, have you?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Bella forced herself to breathe normally. "Strange how?" "I don't know. They keep to themselves, which is fine, but Dr. Cullen called in a report last night about suspicious individuals in the area. Then we get these reports of explosions, possible gunfire." Charlie shrugged, but his eyes were sharp. "Could be completely unrelated. Could be coincidence. But my gut says there's something off, and I've learned to trust my gut." Bella thought about Edward's cold hands, Alice's knowing smiles, the way the entire family moved with inhuman grace. She thought about the secret she'd been keeping, the truth that sat in her chest like a lead weight. "I haven't noticed anything," she lied. The words tasted bitter. Charlie studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being read by someone who'd spent 20 years learning to spot deception. But finally he nodded. "All right. Just be careful, okay? And if you do see anything weird, you tell me. No matter how small it seems." "I will, Dad." He drove off, and Bella stood in the parking lot feeling the weight of too many secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Edward appeared at her elbow so quickly she barely registered the movement. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here. Follow me to our place." She wanted to argue, to demand answers right there in the open, but the strain in his voice stopped her. "Okay." The drive to the Cullen house felt longer than usual. Rain hammered against her windshield, and the forest pressed in on both sides of the road, dark and impenetrable. By the time she pulled into their driveway, her nerves were stretched thin. The entire family was waiting in the living room. Even Rosalie, who usually made herself scarce when Bella visited, sat on the arm of the sofa with her arms crossed. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut. "Before you ask," Edward said as soon as she stepped inside, "we didn't cause the disturbance in the forest, but we know who did." Carlyle stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Bella, I'm going to tell you something that may be difficult to accept. There are other supernatural beings in the world, besides vampires and shapeshifters." "I know," Bella said. "You've mentioned the Volturi." "Beyond the Volturi. Beyond our kind entirely." Carlyle turned to face her. "Last night, 3 nomadic vampires entered our territory. They were hunting humans. Before we could intervene, they were eliminated by someone else. Someone very old, very powerful, and not bound by the same rules we follow." Alice spoke up from her position on the couch. "His name is Alucard. At least that's what he calls himself. He came here last night after he dealt with the nomads." "Dealt with?" Bella repeated. "Killed them," Rosalie said bluntly. "With guns. Loud, obvious, impossible-to-miss guns that probably woke up half the forest." Edward moved to Bella's side, his presence both comforting and tense. "He's not like us. Stronger, faster, and without our particular dietary restrictions. But he claims he's here on some kind of assignment, hunting supernatural threats." Bella processed this, her mind racing through implications. "And Charlie knows something happened. He asked me if I'd noticed anything strange around you guys." The room went silent. Jasper swore quietly. "That's the problem," Carlyle said heavily. "Alucard operates without regard for secrecy. He's effective, perhaps even well-intentioned, but his methods draw attention. Exactly the kind of attention the Volturi exist to prevent." "So what do we do?" Bella asked. Before anyone could answer, a knock sounded at the door. Not the tentative tap of a human visitor, but 3 measured strikes that managed to sound both polite and inevitable. Edward's jaw clenched. "He's back." Carlyle opened the door to reveal Alucard looking entirely too pleased with himself. The rain had soaked his coat, but he seemed unconcerned, as if weather was something that happened to other people. "Good evening, Doctor. I hope I'm not interrupting." His crimson gaze swept the room and landed on Bella. Something flickered in his expression, curiosity perhaps, or amusement. "And you've brought the human. How delightfully complicated." Bella felt Edward tense beside her, but she stepped forward before he could intervene. Some instinct told her that showing fear would be the worst possible response. "I'm Bella Swan." Alucard tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of a cat examining a mouse that had inexplicably failed to run. "Brave or foolish? The line between the two is often thinner than people realize." He shifted his attention back to Carlyle. "I came to deliver a courtesy warning, Doctor. The local constabulary is investigating last night's incident. They found evidence at the scene, shell casings, disturbed earth traces of ash that their limited equipment can't properly analyze." "Charlie," Bella breathed. "Chief Swan, yes, a persistent man. I admire that in humans. They're so often willing to look at uncomfortable truths." Alucard's smile was sharp. "Unfortunately, his persistence is about to become everyone's problem." Carlyle's voice remained calm, but Bella could hear the steel underneath. "What did you do?" "I eliminated a threat, Doctor. That's what I do. That 3 vampires died in the process is regrettable only in the sense that it created evidence." Alucard moved into the room with fluid grace, uninvited, but unchallenged. But I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to propose a solution. We're listening, Carlyle said carefully. The human authorities will investigate. They'll find nothing conclusive because the truth is too strange for their limited paradigms. But they'll keep looking, keep asking questions. Unless, of course, they're given a reasonable explanation. Alucard glanced at Bella again. The chief's daughter has access to both worlds. She could be quite useful in managing the narrative. Absolutely not, Edward snapped. Bella's not getting involved in your cleanup operation. She's already involved, boy. The moment she fell in love with a vampire, she stepped into our world. The only question is whether she'll be a liability or an asset. Bella felt the familiar flush of anger that came whenever someone discussed her as if she wasn't in the room. I can speak for myself, and I'm not lying to my father to cover up your mess. Alucard's expression shifted to something approaching respect. No, then what would you suggest Miss Swan allow him to keep digging until he stumbles onto truths that will force the Volturi to intervene? Because that's what happens when humans discover too much. Your vampire friends understand this. It's why they've spent decades maintaining their careful facade. The weight of that truth settled over the room like a shroud. Bella had known abstractly that the Volturi enforced secrecy with brutal efficiency. But hearing it stated so baldly, knowing her father could become a target, made it visceral and terrifying. There has to be another way, she said quietly. There's always another way, Alucard agreed. But they're rarely pleasant. Tell me, Miss Swan, what would your father do if he found proof? Real, incontrovertible proof that vampires exist. Bella thought about Charlie, steady, practical Charlie, who'd spent his whole life serving and protecting the people of Forks. He'd try to keep people safe, warn them. Exactly. And in doing so, he'd sign his own death warrant. The Volturi don't tolerate exposure. Alucard's voice softened just slightly. I've seen it before. Good people, brave people who paid the price for knowing too much. It's a tragedy. One I'd prefer not to repeat if it can be avoided. Jasper spoke up, his southern drawl more pronounced than usual. You're saying you'll help us manage this? I'm saying I'll clean up my own mess since it seems to be causing distress to the doctor's household. Alucard pulled something from his coat pocket, a spent shell casing. I'll ensure the evidence points away from anything supernatural. A hunter's misadventure, perhaps? Illegal ammunition that caused more damage than intended. The authorities will accept it because it fits their understanding of the world. And in return? Rosalie asked skeptically. In return, you allow me to continue my work without interference. The threats I'm tracking are real doctor, demonic entities that feed on human fear, rogue supernatural creatures that care nothing for secrecy or order. I eliminate them before they become everyone's problem. He pocketed the casing. Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement. Carlyle studied him for a long moment. You understand we can't simply trust you. We don't know your true motives, your ultimate goals. Of course not. Trust is earned, not given. I'm patient enough to work within those constraints. Alucard moved toward the door, then paused. But, I should mention the Volturi are already aware something unusual is happening in the Pacific Northwest. They have trackers, watchers. It's only a matter of time before they send someone to investigate. Alice's breath caught. You're certain? I've dealt with organizations like the Volturi before. They're efficient, thorough, and deeply territorial. An unknown entity operating in what they consider their domain, they'll respond. The only question is how aggressively. He left without waiting for a response, disappearing into the rain-soaked evening as if he'd never been there at all. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Finally, Emmett spoke. "I don't trust him." "Neither do I," Carlyle said quietly. "But he's not wrong about the Volturi. If they send Jane or Alec to investigate, this could become significantly more dangerous." Bella found Edward's hand, gripping it tightly. "What do we do?" Edward pulled her close, his cold skin a familiar comfort. "We prepare. And we hope that whatever Alucard is really hunting it doesn't bring the kind of attention that destroys everything we've built here." In the forest, miles from the Cullen house, Alucard stood in a clearing and looked up at the rain-heavy sky. He'd been truthful with them, more or less. The Volturi were indeed aware. The threats were indeed real. But he hadn't mentioned the other truth, the one that made this assignment both fascinating and dangerous. The thing he was hunting had noticed him too, and it was learning to hide. He smiled at the darkness, the Cullens and Jackal ready at his sides, and waited for the game to truly begin. At the Forks police station, Charlie Swan sat at his desk, surrounded by reports and grainy photographs. The evidence didn't make sense. The shell casings were too large, the damage too extensive, the whole scene too clean, despite the apparent violence. But somewhere in the inconsistencies was a pattern. He was sure of it. He just had to look hard enough. The treaty line had stood for decades. An invisible boundary carved through the forest by blood and necessity. On one side, the Cullens and their golden-eyed restraint. On the other, the Quileute protectors and their ancestral duty. Both sides respected the division because the alternative was war, and war served no one. Tonight, that balance trembled. Sam Yulee stood at the edge of Quileute land, his body tense with the kind of alertness that preceded transformation. Beside him, Jacob Black shifted his weight from foot to foot, fighting the instinct to phase. The scent that had drawn them here was wrong in ways their human minds struggled to articulate, but their wolf instincts understood perfectly. Vampire. But not like the Cullens. "It's been moving along the boundary for the past hour," Paul said, his voice tight with barely controlled aggression. "Testing it, like it's looking for weak points." "Or seeing if we'll respond," Jared added. Sam closed his eyes, reaching for the pack-mule, mind feeling the threads of consciousness that bound them together. Quill was ranging north. Embry had circled south. All of them felt it, the presence that didn't belong, the threat that needed to be addressed. "We warned the Cullens this would happen," Jacob said. "We told them bringing in outsiders would cause problems." "The Cullens didn't bring him," Sam corrected. "According to Billy's conversation with Carlyle, this one operates independently. Some kind of hunter." "Hunter." Paul spat the word. "Vampires don't hunt vampires. They hunt us, hunt humans." The scent shifted, moving closer to the line. Sam felt his temperature spike, his body preparing for the transformation, whether he willed it or not. Around him, the others tensed. "Hold," Sam commanded. "We don't attack unless he crosses." "And if he does," Paul challenged, "then we remind him why this land is protected." They didn't have to wait long. The figure emerged from the tree line with the fluid grace of a predator that had never learned to fear anything. Tall, angular, wrapped in that distinctive crimson coat that seemed to drink in what little moonlight penetrated the clouds. His eyes gleamed red in the darkness, and when he smiled, it was the expression of something that found the entire world amusing. "Good evening, gentlemen," Alucard said, his accented voice carrying easily across the clearing. "I hope I'm not trespassing." The boundaries in this region are so terribly unclear. Sam stepped forward, feeling his body begin the shift. Heat flooded through him, bone and muscle restructuring with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, he stood on 4 legs, nearly 9 feet tall at the shoulder, his massive wolf form radiating challenge. The others followed his lead. Jacob's russet brown fur, Paul's silver gray, Jared's brown. 4 enormous wolves, each one capable of tearing apart a vampire with ease, arrayed in a defensive line. Alucard's smile widened. Magnificent. I've encountered shapeshifters before, but you're something different. True therianthropes bound to the lunar cycle and bloodline both. He tilted his head, studying them with the clinical interest of a naturalist examining a new species. Tell me, do you dream in human thoughts or wolf instincts when you sleep? Sam growled low and threatening. The sound rumbled through the forest like distant thunder. Not in a conversational mood. I understand. Alucard took a single step forward, crossing the invisible line. Though I should point out that territorial posturing only works when both parties agree to respect the boundaries. Paul lunged first, unable to contain his aggression any longer. He moved with the supernatural speed of his wolf-formed jaws, wide enough to crush a telephone pole, aiming directly for Alucard's throat. He never made contact. Alucard sidestepped the attack with minimal effort, his movement so fluid it seemed choreographed. Paul's momentum carried him past, and he scrambled to turn claws, gouging furrows in the earth. Fast, Alucard observed, but predictable. Jared and Quill attacked simultaneously, trying to flank him from both sides. It should have worked. No vampire could dodge in 2 directions at once, not when the wolves moved with pack coordination, their minds linked and synchronized. But Alucard wasn't dodging. He was standing perfectly still, and somehow the wolves' trajectories simply failed to intersect with his position. It was like watching water flow around a stone, natural and inevitable and completely inexplicable. Sam charged, his massive form barreling forward with enough force to snap trees. This time, Alucard didn't sidestep. He caught Sam's attack head-on, one hand shooting up to grip the wolf's jaw in mid-lunge. The impact should have torn his arm off. Instead, Alucard's feet skidded back a few inches across the wet ground, but his stance remained solid. Sam's enormous weight, his supernatural strength, all of it arrested by 5 fingers wrapped around his lower jaw. Impressive, Alucard said conversationally, as if he wasn't currently holding back a creature that weighed over 400 pounds and could bite through steel. You're stronger than you look. Considerably stronger. Sam thrashed, trying to break free, but the grip was immovable. In the pack mind, he felt the other's shock mixing with his own. Nothing should be this strong. Even the Cullens, with their marble-hard skin and vampiric power, could be overwhelmed by the pack's coordinated attacks. This was different. This was wrong. Alucard released him with a gentle push, and Sam stumbled backward, regaining his footing with difficulty. The other wolves circled, looking for an opening, but uncertainty had crept into their movements. I didn't come here to fight you, Alucard said, his tone almost gentle. I came to establish that fighting me would be inadvisable, for both our sakes. Paul, driven by rage and wounded pride, launched another attack. This time, Alucard didn't catch him. He simply raised one hand, and Paul's trajectory shifted mid-air, as if an invisible force had swatted him aside. The wolf crashed into a tree hard enough to crack the trunk, then slid to the ground, dazed but not seriously injured. Jacob moved next, trying a different approach. Instead of a direct assault, he feinted left, then pivoted right, using the pack's coordinated movement to create an opening. It was their most effective tactic against the Cullens, the strategy that had kept the treaty balanced through multiple confrontations. Alucard watched the approach with interest, then did something that froze all four wolves in their tracks. He laughed. Not a mocking laugh, not the cruel amusement of a predator toying with prey. This was genuine delighted laughter, the sound of someone encountering something unexpected and wonderful. "Oh, that's clever," he said, still chuckling. "Pack tactics. Using the telepathic bond to coordinate strikes from multiple angles simultaneously. I haven't seen that in nearly 2 centuries. He composed himself, though the smile remained. "Unfortunately for you, I've had considerably longer than 2 centuries to learn how to counter it." He moved then, not to attack, but to demonstrate. In the space between heartbeats, he was among them, weaving through their defensive formation as if it didn't exist. He touched each wolf in passing a tap on Jacob's shoulder, a brush against Jared's flank, a gentle push against Sam's side. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to prove a point. They couldn't touch him, but he could touch them whenever he wished. The pack regrouped, panting frustration and confusion, warring in their linked consciousness. Sam felt his temperature cooling, the rage that fueled their transformation beginning to ebb into something more calculating. This wasn't a fight they could win through force, and Alucard seemed to know it. "I've made my point," Alucard said, stepping back to the treaty line. "You're formidable opponents. In a fair fight, you might even pose a challenge." His expression shifted, the amusement fading into something harder. "But I don't fight fair. I fight to end threats. And while I respect your role as protectors, I need you to understand something crucial." He pulled out the Casal, the massive handgun, seeming almost casual in his grip. He didn't point it at them, just held it loosely, letting them see it clearly. "I've killed things older than your tribe's bloodline. I've ended threats that would make your vampiric neighbors seem like children playing dress-up. I'm not here to conquer your territory or challenge your authority." He holstered the weapon. "I'm here because something worse is coming. Something that won't honor treaties or respect boundaries. And when it arrives, you'll want me on your side, rather than as another problem to manage." Sam phased back to human form, standing naked and unashamed in the rain. The others followed his lead, their transformations leaving them breathing hard but focused. "What kind of threat?" Sam asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "The kind that feeds on fear and chaos. Demonic entities that slip through the cracks between worlds. They're attracted to places of supernatural convergence, and Forks has become something of a beacon." Alucard tilted his head. "The Cullens don't pose a significant threat to your people because they've chosen restraint. Whatever is coming won't make that choice." Jacob stepped forward, his jaw tight. "And you expect us to just trust you? After you crossed our border, fought us, proved you could—" "Kill you," Alucard finished. "I expect nothing. Trust is earned, and I haven't earned yours. I'm simply providing information. What you do with it is your decision." "The Cullens said you work for some organization," Sam said. "Who?" "Hellsing." Alucard's smile returned sharp and knowing. "A group dedicated to eliminating supernatural threats to humanity. We have different methods than your Volturi, different jurisdictions. But our goal is the same: maintain the balance, prevent exposure. Keep the monsters in the dark where they belong." Paul, still nursing bruised ribs from his collision with the tree, glared. "You're a monster yourself." "Correct." Alucard's red eyes gleamed. "Which is why I'm so effective at hunting them. It takes one to know one, as the saying goes." The pack stood in the rain processing this. Sam felt the pack mind churning with questions. concerns the instinctive distrust of anything vampire mixing with the pragmatic understanding that Alucard's warning might be legitimate. "We'll need to consult with the elders," Sam said finally. "Billy Black, Quill, Atiara, Sue Clearwater. This isn't a decision the pack makes alone. Of course, take your time. I'll be in the area for the foreseeable future." Alucard turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. When the Volturi send their representatives to investigate, and they will, I'd recommend maintaining distance. Jane and Alec don't share the Cullens' restraint, and they view shapeshifters as abominations at best." "We can handle vampires," Jacob said with more confidence than he felt. Alucard glanced back over his shoulder, and for just a moment, something ancient and sad flickered in his expression. "Yes, you can handle vampires. But the Volturi Guard aren't simply vampires. Their weapons refined over millennia. Jane can make you feel pain you've never imagined. Alec can remove your senses entirely, leaving you blind and deaf and helpless." He paused. "I tell you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. If they come, stay out of their way. Let me handle it." "Why would you protect us?" Sam asked. "I wouldn't. I'd be protecting the balance. You're part of that balance as much as the Cullens, as much as the humans who remain blissfully ignorant. Everything has its place in the ecosystem." Alucard smiled again. "Besides, I quite like this region. The rain reminds me of England. I'd prefer not to see it become a battlefield." He disappeared into the forest without another word, his presence fading like smoke on the wind. The pack stood in silence for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Finally, Jacob spoke. "We need to tell Billy and Carlisle. Everyone needs to know what we're dealing with." Sam nodded, his mind already racing through contingencies and preparations. "Agreed. And we double the patrols. If something worse is coming, we need to be ready." As they began the run back to La Push, each wolf carrying their own troubled thoughts, none of them noticed the small detail that would become significant later. When Alucard had fought them, when he'd taken their strongest attacks and shrugged them off with apparent ease, he'd been smiling, not with mockery or cruelty, but with something that looked almost like joy. The first genuine challenge he'd encountered in decades, and it had been over in less than 5 minutes. That, more than anything else, should have told them how outmatched they truly were. Miles away at the Cullen house, Alice suddenly gasped, her eyes going distant as another vision crashed through her consciousness. She saw the clearing, saw the wolves, saw Alucard moving among them like a dancer among statues. And beyond that, darker and more fragmented, she saw something else. Something that wore Atsa, human skin like a costume, and fed on terror like wine. The real threat Alucard had mentioned. It was closer than he'd let on, and it was already hunting. Volterra had stood for 3,000 years, a city built on layers of history and secrets. Beneath its sun-baked streets and medieval architecture lay chambers that predated Rome itself, halls where the Volturi conducted the business of maintaining their immortal empire. In the highest tower, Aro sat in contemplative silence, his pale fingers steepled before him. Across from him, Dmitri stood with the patient stillness of a soldier awaiting orders. "Tell me again," Aro said softly, "what you sensed." Dmitri's expression remained carefully neutral. "A disturbance in the Pacific Northwest. The tenor of a mind I've never encountered before. When I tried to track it properly, the signal became fragmented, like listening to 1,000 voices screaming at once, all from the same source." "Fascinating." Aro's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. And you're certain this isn't simply the Cullens expanding their coven? The Cullens register clearly master. This is something else entirely. The signature is old, older than most of our kind. Dmitri paused, choosing his words carefully. It reminded me of the ancient ones we encountered in Eastern Europe. The originals who predate our laws. Caius leaned forward from his throne, his expression sharp with interest. You think we have a rogue elder operating in Cullen territory? I think we have an unknown variable that needs investigation, Dmitri replied. The Cullens have always been compliant, if eccentric. But if they're harboring something dangerous, or if something dangerous has taken an interest in their region, the implications could be significant. Marcus, silent until now, stirred in his seat. His ancient eyes held a weariness that came from millennia of existence, but also a sharp intelligence that few remembered to fear. The bonds around Forks have shifted. I felt it 3 nights ago. New connections forming old patterns, disrupting. Something is altering the supernatural fabric of that region. Aro absorbed this information, his mind already calculating possibilities and contingencies. The Volturi's power rested on absolute control of their kind, on the certainty that no vampire operated outside their knowledge and jurisdiction. An unknown entity represented not just a potential threat, but a challenge to their authority. What do you recommend? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Send me to investigate, Dmitri said. Let me get close enough to identify the source properly. Once we know what we're dealing with, we can decide on an appropriate response. No. Caius shook his head sharply. If this entity is as powerful as you suggest, sending a single tracker is insufficient. We need a show of force, a reminder that the Volturi's reach extends everywhere. And risk escalation, Aro countered gently. If this is indeed an ancient power, confronting it with aggression might provoke exactly the kind of exposure we exist to prevent. The 3 leaders fell into thoughtful silence. Finally, Aro made his decision. Dmitri will go, but not alone. Take Felix as well. Observe, identify, report back. If the situation requires intervention, we'll send Jane and Alec. He paused, his red eyes gleaming. But first, let us extend an invitation, a gesture of diplomacy. You want to invite them here? Caius looked skeptical. I want to understand what we're dealing with. An invitation to Volterra, properly framed, will tell us much about this entity's nature. Whether they accept or refuse, how they respond, what they reveal in the process. All valuable information. Aro stood, his robes rustling. Besides, I find myself curious. It's been so long since anything truly unexpected crossed our path. In Forks 3 days later, the invitation arrived. Edward found it first, though calling it an invitation felt inadequate. The envelope was heavy parchment sealed with wax that bore the Volturi's crest. It had been placed on their doorstep sometime during the day, left by a messenger who had come and gone without anyone noticing. The family gathered in the living room as Carlyle broke the seal and read the contents aloud. His voice remained steady, but Alice could see the tension in his shoulders. To the esteemed Cullen family and their distinguished guest, greetings from Volterra. It has come to our attention that recent events in your region have disrupted the usual patterns of our community. We extend this invitation in the spirit of understanding and peaceful resolution. We request the presence of your household's newest addition at the Volturi seat, so that we might better comprehend the nature of their purpose and ensure continued harmony within our jurisdiction. We trust this request will be received in the spirit of cooperation that has always characterized our relationship. The letter was signed by all three leaders, but Alice recognized Aro's particular phrasing throughout. Polite, careful, and absolutely unyielding beneath the diplomatic language. They know about Alucard. Emmett stated the obvious. Of course they know, Rosalie said. The question is what they plan to do about it. Edward paced near the window, his jaw tight. This isn't really an invitation. It's a summons. They're demanding he present himself for evaluation. And if he refuses, Jasper asked. Then they'll come here in force, Carlyle said quietly. The Volturi don't make requests they expect to be denied. This is them offering a peaceful option before resorting to more aggressive measures. Alice closed her eyes, reaching for her gift. The futures she saw were tangled multiple paths branching in ways that made her head ache. In some, Alucard went to Volterra and returned. In others, he went and didn't return. In still others, the Volturi came to Forks, and everything ended in ash and screaming. But in every future, she could see one constant remained. Alucard met the Volturi face to face. It was inevitable. We need to find him, she said, opening her eyes. Before Dimitri does. They found Alucard in the forest, standing in a clearing that bore signs of recent violence. Trees had been torn apart, the ground scorched in strange patterns, and the air held a sulfuric taint that made even vampire senses recoil. He stood in the center of the devastation, studying something in his hand. As they approached, Alice saw it was a piece of blackened flesh, still smoking faintly. Demon, Alucard said without looking up. Class 3, maybe 4? It was feeding on a family's fear 3 miles east. I tracked it here and eliminated it before it could spawn. He tossed the remains aside where they dissolved into ash. The infestation is worse than I anticipated. This is the 5th one this week. The Volturi have summoned you to Volterra, Carlyle said, cutting to the point. Alucard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his red eyes. Have they? How delightfully presumptuous. Edward stepped forward. This isn't a joke. If you refuse, they'll come here. Jane, Alec, the entire guard. And they won't be as diplomatic as Aro's letter. I'm aware of their reputation. Alucard brushed ash from his coat. I've dealt with organizations like the Volturi before. They all share the same fundamental flaw. They believe power equals authority. In their world, it does, Carlyle said. The Volturi have maintained order for thousands of years through absolute enforcement. They don't tolerate challenges to their sovereignty. Then perhaps it's time someone reminded them that sovereignty is a privilege, not a right. Alucard's smile was sharp. But I appreciate your concern, Doctor. Tell me, what would you have me do, bow and scrape before your vampire royalty? Beg permission to continue my work? I'd have you be smart about this, Carlyle replied, his tone firm. Aro is calculating and curious. He'll want to understand you before he decides whether you're a threat. That gives you an opening. If you go to Volterra, willingly present yourself as reasonable and controlled, you might avoid a conflict entirely. And if I don't, then they'll hunt you, and everyone associated with you becomes a target. Carlyle met Alucard's gaze steadily. That includes us. It includes Bella. It includes the Quileute pack. The Volturi don't limit their punishments to the guilty party. Alucard was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I'll accept their invitation. It might even prove educational. I've never visited Volterra before. Sanitin. You're actually going? Emmett sounded surprised. Why not? I'm curious about these vampire kings who think they rule the night. And besides, Alucard's smile widened, I've been alive long enough to know that some confrontations are inevitable. Better to meet them on neutral ground than wait for them to bring war to your doorstep. Alice felt a chill run through her. In her visions, this was the moment where futures began to solidify. Alucard walking into Volterra's ancient halls, standing before Aro and his brothers, the weight of millennia bearing down on all sides. She just couldn't see what happened next. Every time she tried to focus past his arrival, the visions shattered into chaos. "When do they expect you?" Alucard asked. Carlyle checked the letter again. "Within the week. They've left the specific timing to your discretion, but the implication is clear: the sooner the better." "Then I'll leave tomorrow night. Give me time to finish my current hunt and ensure the region is secure in my absence." Alucard turned to go, then paused. "Doctor, a word of advice. When the Volturi's tracker arrives, and he will arrive probably within the next few days, don't attempt to hide anything from him. Dimitri's gift makes deception pointless. Cooperation will serve you better than resistance." "You're certain they'll send someone ahead?" Edward asked. "Of course." Aro is cautious beneath his curiosity. He'll want independent verification before committing to a personal meeting. Alucard's expression turned thoughtful. "Tell the tracker I'll be in Volterra as requested. Tell him I look forward to meeting his masters. And tell him," his smile returned sharp and dangerous, "that I hope they're as interesting as their reputation suggests." He disappeared into the forest, leaving the Cullens standing amid the demon's destruction. "This is going to end badly," Rosalie said flatly. "Maybe," Carlyle replied. "Or maybe Alucard is exactly the kind of unpredictable element that will force the Volturi to reconsider their assumptions." Edward shook his head. "You're giving him too much credit. Aro has survived 3,000 years by being smarter than his opponents. Whatever Alucard thinks he's walking into the Volturi will be prepared." "Perhaps," Alice said quietly. "But I don't think preparation will be enough. Not this time." 2 days later, Dimitri arrived in Forks. He came alone, though the Cullens could sense Felix waiting somewhere in the forest, a presence held in reserve. Carlyle received him with the same careful courtesy he showed all Volturi representatives, offering hospitality, even as tension filled the house. Dimitri was professional, efficient, and unnervingly thorough. He asked pointed questions about Alucard's activities, his capabilities, his stated purpose. The Cullens answered honestly, partly because lying to Dimitri was futile, partly because Alucard's instructions had been clear. "He's agreed to come to Volterra?" Dimitri asked, sounding faintly surprised. "Willingly," Carlyle confirmed. "He said he leaves tonight." Dimitri nodded slowly, processing this. "That's unexpected. Most entities of his apparent power level are less cooperative with authority." "I think he views it as an opportunity rather than a threat," Edward said. "He seems to enjoy challenges." "Then he may find Volterra more challenging than he anticipates." Dimitri stood preparing to leave. "Tell him the masters await his arrival with great interest. And Doctor," he paused at the door, "for your family's sake, I hope he proves as reasonable in Volterra as he claims to be here." After Dimitri left, the house fell into uneasy silence. They all felt it, the sense of pieces moving on a board too large to fully comprehend forces aligning toward an inevitable collision. That night, Alucard appeared one final time before his departure. He stood in their driveway, the castle and jackal holstered at his sides, his red coat pristine despite the rain. "I'll return within the week," he said, "assuming the Volturi don't try anything foolish." "And if they do?" Carlyle asked. Alucard's smile was cold and ancient. Then I'll remind them that age doesn't guarantee wisdom and power doesn't guarantee victory. He tipped an imaginary hat. Until we meet again, Doctor, do try to keep forks from burning down in my absence. He vanished into the night, heading south toward Italy and whatever waited in Volterra's ancient halls. Alice watched him go, her gift churning with fragmentary visions of throne rooms and testing grounds, of Jane's cruel smile, and Alec's empty eyes of Aro's calculating gaze, meeting Alucard's ancient amusement. And underneath it all, a current of something darker. The real threat Alucard had been hunting, still lurking in Fork's shadows, waiting for the hunter to leave. "It's not over," she whispered. Edward took her hand. "It's barely begun." In Volterra, Aro stood before a window overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. Marcus and Caius flanked him, all three leaders, united in anticipation. "He's coming," Aro said softly. Dmitri confirmed it. "The stranger walks willingly into our home." "Should we be concerned?" Caius asked. Aro's smile was slight but genuine. "Oh, absolutely. Anything powerful enough to disrupt Dimitri's tracking and confident enough to accept our invitation without hesitation is worth considerable concern." He turned to face his brothers. "But that's what makes this fascinating, doesn't it? We've grown complacent, ruling unopposed for so long. This stranger represents either a threat to be eliminated or an ally to be secured. Either way, the next few nights will be illuminating." Marcus stirred. "And if he proves to be neither, then we'll discover what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object." Aro's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "I, for one, can't wait to find out." The game was set. The players were in motion. And in the shadows between Forks and Volterra, something ancient and hungry watched and waited, knowing that chaos created opportunity, and opportunity was what it needed most. The throne room in Volterra had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the judgment of countless immortals, the slow turning of centuries into millennia. Its stone walls absorbed secrets the way earth absorbed rain, patient and eternal. Tonight, those walls would bear witness to something unprecedented. Alucard walked through the ancient corridors with the easy confidence of someone who had survived worse than political theater. The Volturi guard flanked him at a respectful distance, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid seeming openly hostile. He appreciated the gesture. It showed intelligence, if not actual respect. The architecture fascinated him. Medieval Italian craftsmanship layered over Roman foundations, which themselves rested on something older still. He could smell the age in the stone, the accumulated weight of blood and power that soaked into every surface. "You're admiring our home," a voice said from ahead. Aro appeared at the end of the corridor, his pale hands spread in a gesture of welcome. "It pleases me. So few visitors appreciate the artistry of preservation." "I've always had an eye for history," Alucard replied, "though I find the spaces between the stones more interesting than the stones themselves. The gaps where the truth hides." Aro's smile widened. "We shall get along splendidly, I think. Come, my brothers await." The throne room exceeded even Alucard's expectations. 3 seats of power dominated the far wall, elevated on a dais that spoke of hierarchy and dominion. Marcus sat to the left, his ancient face impassive. Caius occupied the right, his expression sharp with barely concealed hostility. And Aro took the center throne with the ease of someone who had occupied it for so long. It had become an extension of himself. The guard lined the walls. Felix's massive form near the door Dmitri positioned strategically for optimal tracking, and dozens of others whose names Alucard didn't know, but whose purposes he could read in their stances and expressions. Executioners, all of them. Weapons dressed in courtly manners. But it was the two figures standing closest to the thrones that drew his attention. A young woman and man, both appearing no older than teenagers, with faces that held the disturbing stillness of dolls. Their eyes were the deep crimson of fresh blood, and when they looked at him, Alucard saw something that almost made him smile. Predators recognizing another predator. "Welcome to Volterra." Aro said, his voice carrying through the chamber with practiced projection. "We are honored by your willingness to accept our invitation. Such cooperation is sadly quite rare among beings of significant power." "I was curious," Alucard said simply. "Your organization has maintained order among vampires for thousands of years. That kind of longevity requires either exceptional competence or exceptional ruthlessness. I wanted to determine which." Caius's jaw tightened, but Aro laughed a genuine sound that echoed off the stone. "Why not both competence and ruthlessness are not mutually exclusive? Indeed, I find they complement each other beautifully." He descended from his throne with fluid grace, approaching Alucard with his hand extended. "May I find physical contact so much more illuminating than conversation." Alucard understood what was being asked. Aro's gift allowed him to read every thought, every memory with a single touch. It was an invasion of privacy so profound that most beings would refuse on principle. He took Aro's hand. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Aro's expression shifted through a dozen emotions. In that brief span, curiosity melting into shock, shock bleeding into fascination, fascination hardening into something approaching awe. When he released Alucard's hand, his smile had gained an edge of wariness. "Remarkable," Aro breathed. "Absolutely remarkable. You are not one consciousness, but a confluence. Thousands of absorbed souls, all bound within a single vessel. And beneath them, something older than Rome itself. Older than..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You were human once, Prince of Wallachia. But what you became after that defies simple categorization." "I am what I needed to be to survive," Alucard said. "And what I became in the process of that survival." Marcus stirred for the first time, his tired eyes focusing with unexpected sharpness. "The bonds within you are twisted, consumed but not destroyed, subjugated but not silent. Every soul you've taken continues to exist inside you, a chorus of the dying that never stops screaming." "Yes," Alucard agreed calmly, "though I've learned to appreciate the company over the centuries." Caius stood, his patience clearly exhausted. "You admit to consuming souls that alone violates a dozen of our fundamental laws. The creation of immortals, the abuse of vampiric powers, Your laws," Alucard interrupted gently, "apply to your jurisdiction. I operate under different authority. The Helsing organization has its own mandates, its own territory, its own purpose. We've never intersected because our goals have never conflicted until now. Until you decided to operate in Cullen territory," Caius countered. "That region falls under our protection. Any supernatural activity there requires our sanction. I wasn't aware the Volturi claimed dominion over demons." Alucard's tone remained conversational, but something cold flickered in his crimson eyes. "My assignment in Washington involves entities that predate your organization by millennia. Things that slip between the cracks of your ordered world and feed on human suffering. That's what I hunt. That's what I eliminate. Aro raised a hand forestalling Caius's response. You mentioned the Helsing organization. We are, I confess, unfamiliar with this entity. Enlighten us. A British institution founded to combat supernatural threats to humanity. We've operated for over a century in various forms, though our roots extend considerably further back. Our methods differ from yours. We eliminate threats rather than govern them. And we care less about maintaining a civilization of vampires than preventing vampires from disrupting human civilization. And you serve this organization willingly? Marcus asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. A being of your power reduced to following orders. I serve because the alternative is boredom, Alucard said. And because occasionally the orders lead me somewhere interesting. Aro paced slowly, his mind visibly working through possibilities and implications. You present us with a dilemma. Your power is undeniable. I saw enough in your memories to know you could reduce this room to rubble if properly motivated. Yet you claim no interest in challenging our authority or disrupting our order. You simply wish to hunt your demons and be left alone. Essentially, yes. The problem, Caius said coldly, is that we have only your word for these benign intentions. For all we know, you're conducting reconnaissance for this Helsing organization, preparing to challenge Volturi authority across the globe. Alucard's smile turned sharp. If I wanted to challenge your authority, I wouldn't need reconnaissance. I'd simply do it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Every guard tensed, hands moving toward weapons that would be useless against what Alucard represented. Only Aro remained relaxed, his expression thoughtful. A demonstration, perhaps, Aro said, to establish baseline capabilities and intentions. Jane, if you would. The young woman stepped forward, her doll-like face showing no emotion. But Alucard saw the eagerness in her eyes, the hunger of someone who had never encountered resistance to her particular gift. This will hurt, she said softly. Please don't take it personally. The pain hit like a physical force, white-hot agony, that should have driven him to his knees. Alucard felt his nervous system light up with phantom flames, every nerve ending screaming that he was being burned alive from the inside out. It was an illusion. He knew Jane's gift created the sensation of pain without physical damage. It was also magnificent. Alucard threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing through the throne room with wild abandon. The pain continued, wave after wave of simulated burning, but he rode it like a surfer on ocean swells. Each spike of agony brought clarity, focus, the reminder that he was still capable of feeling something other than ennui. More, he said, his voice strained but gleeful. I haven't felt this alive in decades. Jane's confidence faltered. She intensified the assault, pushing her gift to limits she rarely reached. Most vampires collapsed under far less pressure, their minds unable to process the overwhelming input. But Alucard remained standing, swaying slightly, his laughter taking on an edge of genuine delight. Enough, Aro commanded, and Jane released her hold immediately. Alucard steadied himself, still smiling. Fascinating. Pain is pure information divorced from actual tissue damage. It's remarkably efficient, and she can sustain it indefinitely. As long as necessary, Aro said carefully. Most find even brief exposure incapacitating. Most haven't spent centuries learning to appreciate suffering. Alucard straightened his coat. Pain is just another sensation. Unpleasant, certainly, but far preferable to numbness. Caius leaned forward. Alec, your turn. The young man moved with his sister's same eerie grace, approaching until he stood within arm's reach of Alucard. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Close your eyes. It's easier that way." The mist that was Alec's gift crept forward slowly, tendrils of sensory deprivation that wrapped around Alucard like silk scarves. First, his vision faded not to darkness, but to absolute nothing. Then sound vanished, not into silence, but into a void, where even the concept of sound ceased to exist. Touch, taste, smell, all stripped away, layer by layer. For most beings, this was terror. To be cut off from all input, trapped in a prison of absolute sensory deprivation, was a fate worse than death. For Alucard, it was novel. He stood in the void, feeling the absence of sensation, like a weight on his chest. Interesting. Without external input, his consciousness turned inward, encountering the maelstrom of absorbed souls that comprised his true nature. Thousands of voices, usually background noise, suddenly demanding attention. He could end this. Even without his senses, his body remembered how to move, how to fight. But that would prove nothing, except that he was dangerous, which they already knew. Instead, he waited. After what might have been seconds or minutes, time lost meaning without sensory reference points. The world rushed back in. Sound light, the smell of ancient stone and old blood. Alucard blinked, reorienting himself, and found the entire throne room staring at him with varying expressions of shock. "Remarkable control," Marcus observed. "Most beings panic within moments. You simply waited." "I've experienced worse isolations," Alucard said. "At least this one had a clear ending." Aro studied him with renewed fascination. "You're not intimidated by our gifts. Jane's pain doesn't break you. Alec's deprivation doesn't frighten you. What does affect you, I wonder?" "Honest conversation," Alucard replied. "Threats bore me. Displays of power amuse me. But genuine discourse, that's become increasingly rare." The ancient vampire returned to his throne, settling into it, with the air of someone making a significant decision. "Very well. Let us speak plainly. You represent a variable we cannot control, and a power we cannot easily counter. Under normal circumstances, we would eliminate such a threat. But your cooperation tonight, your willingness to submit to testing, suggests you mean what you say about having no interest in challenging our authority." "I don't," Alucard confirmed. "Your vampire politics hold no appeal for me. I have my mission, you have yours. As long as they don't conflict, we can coexist peacefully." "And if they do conflict," Caius demanded, "then we'll negotiate, like civilized beings." Alucard's smile was thin. "Though I should mention, negotiation requires both parties to have something the other wants. What do you have that I might want, I wonder?" The question hung in the air, sharp with implications. Aro's expression shifted through calculation before settling on something approaching approval. "Freedom," he said finally. "Freedom to operate in regions we control without Volturi interference. We could grant you observer status, perhaps. Recognition as a legitimate supernatural entity with specific jurisdiction over demonic threats. In exchange, you would agree to coordinate with us on matters that overlap our interests and refrain from actions that threaten the secrecy we've spent millennia maintaining." "A treaty," Marcus said, seeming to wake fully for the first time. "Unprecedented, but not unworkable." Caius looked ready to object, but Aro silenced him with a gesture. "We've maintained power for 3,000 years by adapting, brother. This stranger represents change, yes, but change can be managed. Better to have him as a reluctant ally than a confirmed enemy." Alucard considered this, weighing options and outcomes. A formal arrangement with the Volturi would provide operational freedom while limiting their ability to interfere. It would also establish him as something other than an outlaw in their eyes, which could prove useful in future encounters. "I accept your proposed terms," he said, "with one addition. The Cullens remain under your protection, not mine. They've been gracious hosts, and I'd prefer not to complicate their relationship with you." "Agreed." Arrow stood, extending his hand once more. "Shall we seal this accord in the traditional manner?" Alucard took his hand, allowing Arrow to read his acceptance, his intentions, his genuine lack of interest in vampire politics. When they separated, Arrow's smile was genuine. "Welcome to the modern age, stranger. May our paths cross only when mutually beneficial." "I'll drink to that," Alucard said. "Metaphorically, of course." As the formal proceedings concluded and the guard began to relax, Arrow gestured for Alucard to walk with him. They moved through the corridors, leaving the throne room's oppressive formality behind. "Tell me," Arrow said conversationally, "what you saw in my thoughts when we touched. I felt you reading me as clearly as I read you." "I saw a being who craves novelty above all else," Alucard replied. 3,000 years have taught you that power without purpose is meaningless. You maintain your empire not because you believe in it, but because the alternative is admitting you've become obsolete. Arrow's laugh was soft and bitter, perceptive and accurate. "Do you know what the worst part of immortality is? The boredom." "Precisely. The endless repetition, the certainty that nothing truly new will ever surprise you again." Arrow stopped at a window overlooking Volterra. "You understand this. I saw it in your memories. That's why you laughed when Jane tried to hurt you. Not because you're invulnerable, but because pain is at least something different from the monotony." "We're more alike than you'd care to admit," Alucard said. "Perhaps, though I've chosen civilization as my distraction while you've chosen violence." Arrow turned from the window. "But we both serve the same purpose. In the end, we maintain the boundaries between worlds, keep the humans safe from truths they cannot comprehend." "Is that what you tell yourself?" "It's what I know." Arrow's smile returned. "Safe travels back to Washington, stranger. And do try to keep the demon hunting quiet. The Cullens have enough trouble maintaining their peculiar lifestyle without you attracting attention." Alucard departed Volterra as the sun began to set. His business concluded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. The Volturi guard watched him leave, and more than one expressed quiet relief that the encounter had ended in negotiation rather than violence. In the throne room, Arrow sat in contemplative silence while his brothers processed what had transpired. "You gave him too much," Caius said finally. "Observer status, operational freedom. He could use that to undermine our authority." "He could," Arrow agreed. "But he won't. I saw his mind, Caius. He's not interested in ruling. He's interested in fighting and finding worthy challenges. We're not challenging enough to hold his attention." He smiled. "Besides, now we have a resource. When something appears that exceeds even our capabilities, we have someone to call." "You think that likely?" Marcus asked. "I think the world is older and stranger than we acknowledge. And beings like our visitor exist precisely because of that strangeness." Arrow stood stretching as if waking from a long sleep. "For the first time in centuries, I feel genuinely uncertain about the future. It's invigorating." Jane approached the throne, her face troubled. "Master, he enjoyed what I did to him. That's never happened before." "I know, dear one. It's disturbing, isn't it? To discover your greatest weapon is someone else's entertainment. Aro touched her shoulder gently. But that's why this accord is valuable. Better he finds his entertainment elsewhere than testing himself against us. As night fell over Volterra, the ancient city settled back into its usual rhythms. But something had shifted in the supernatural landscape, a new understanding established between old powers. And far away, in forks in the shadows, where demons bred and fed, something stirred. It had watched the hunter leave, counted the days until his return, and made its preparations. Alucard might have made peace with the Volturi, but his real war was just beginning. The return journey from Volterra took 3 nights. Alucard could have traveled faster, but he found himself in no particular hurry. The Mediterranean coastline gave way to the Alps, then the endless sprawl of European countryside, each mile a meditation on the strange turn his assignment had taken. A treaty with the Volturi. He'd entered their stronghold expecting confrontation, perhaps even violence. Instead, he'd found something unexpected: recognition. Aro had looked into his mind and seen not a threat to be eliminated, but a mirror reflecting the same ancient weariness. It should have been satisfying. It wasn't. By the time he reached the Pacific Northwest, dawn was breaking over the mountains. He felt the familiar weight of Fork's atmosphere settling over him, the perpetual rain, the dense forest, the layers of supernatural tension that made the region feel like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Something was wrong. The wrongness had texture and weight, a pressure in the air that made even his skin crawl. Alucard paused at the forest edge, extending his senses. There, beneath the normal sounds of wind and rain, a dissonance. A frequency that didn't belong to the natural world, or even to the vampires and shapeshifters who called this place home. Demonic activity. And not the minor Class 3 entities he'd been eliminating. This was something larger, older, feeding on accumulated fear, until it had grown strong enough to manifest physically. He found the Cullens first. Their house was intact but empty, though he could smell the residue of recent panic. A note had been left on the kitchen counter, secured under a paperweight shaped like a crystal apple. Carlyle's precise handwriting covered the page. Alucard, if you're reading this, you've returned to find us gone. We've evacuated to our secondary residence in Alaska. 3 nights ago, something attacked the reservation. 2 Quileute were injured, 1 critically. The entity responsible matches your descriptions of demonic manifestation. We attempted to track it, but whatever this thing is, it's learned to hide from Alice's visions and evade our pursuit. Chief Swan is asking questions we can't answer. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. We judged it safer to remove ourselves as variables until you could return and handle the threat. The shapeshifters have your scent. They'll find you when you're ready. Be careful. This thing has been hunting in your absence, and it's gotten stronger. Carlyle. Alucard read the note twice, then set it back down with deliberate care. Interesting. The demon had waited for him to leave before escalating. That suggested intelligent strategy. Not the mindless hunger of lesser entities, but calculated predation. He smiled. Finally, something worthy of his attention. The Quileute found him before he could seek them out. Sam Yulee approached in human form, though Alucard could sense the others nearby wolves positioned in a loose perimeter. The Alpha's face was drawn, exhaustion evident in every line. "You're back," Sam said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but close. "I am. Tell me what happened." Sam's jaw tightened, but he spoke without preamble. 4 nights ago, something attacked Seth Clearwater while he was on patrol. He's 14 years old, newest member of the pack. It came out of nowhere, no scent, no sound, just suddenly there. Tore into him before he could phase properly. Injuries. Sue Clearwater is a nurse. She's kept him stable, but the wounds aren't healing like they should. They're infected with something that burns. We've tried everything we know, but whatever this thing did to him, it's beyond our medicine. Sam's hands clenched into fists. 2 nights later, it hit Leah during a boundary patrol. Same pattern, no warning, vicious attack, then it vanished before the rest of the pack could respond. You've seen it? Glimpses. It wears human shape sometimes, but there's something wrong about the proportions. And the eyes, when you catch them in the right light, they're empty. Not cruel or hungry, just void. Alucard processed this, fitting the details into his understanding of demonic classification. Class 5, possibly 6. Shapeshifter variant with tactical intelligence. It's been feeding on the fear it generates, using each attack to grow stronger. He met Sam's gaze directly. Where are the wounded? The reservation. But you're not welcome there without, I'm not asking permission. Alucard's tone remained mild, but something in his expression made Sam step back instinctively. Your people are dying from wounds inflicted by an entity I was sent here to eliminate. Politics can wait until after I've ensured they survive the night. The reservation was on edge when they arrived. Alucard could feel it in the way people moved, the quick glances toward the forest, the weapons kept too close at hand. This was a community under siege, and they knew it. Billy Black met them at Sue Clearwater's house, his wheelchair positioned defensively in the doorway. His face was weathered by decades and hardened by recent losses, but his eyes were sharp as he studied Alucard. You're the one who fought our boys and walked away laughing. I am. I'm also the one who knows how to save your wounded. Alucard inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that surprised everyone present. May I see them? Billy held his gaze for a long moment, then wheeled aside. Sue's upstairs with Seth. Leah's in the back room. Don't make me regret this. Seth Clearwater lay in a bed too small for his frame, his face pale beneath his natural coloring. The wounds across his chest, and shoulder, were bandaged. But even from the doorway, Alucard could smell the corruption. Demonic essence purposefully injected to prevent healing. Sue sat beside her son, one hand gripping his. She looked up as Alucard entered, her expression shifting from hope to fear to determination in rapid succession. Can you help him? Yes. Alucard approached the bed, studying the wound patterns. But the process won't be pleasant. The demonic corruption needs to be purged, and that requires... He paused, considering how to explain. Exposure to something equally unnatural. My blood has properties that counter demonic essence, but introducing it to a system will feel like poison, fighting poison. Will it kill him? Sue's voice was steady, but her grip on Seth's hand tightened. No, but he'll wish it would briefly. Alucard produced a knife from his coat, the blade inscribed with the same blessed symbols that marked his ammunition. The alternative is watching the corruption spread until it reaches his heart. I'd estimate another 48 hours before that becomes terminal. Sue looked at her son, unconscious and vulnerable, then back at Alucard. Do it! The process was brutal and efficient. Alucard's blood applied directly to the wounds reacted with the demonic essence like acid meeting alkali. Seth convulsed his body, trying to reject both poisons simultaneously, while his accelerated healing finally kicked into proper function. Sue held him through it, murmuring reassurances even as tears tracked down her face. When it was over, the wounds had closed to angry red scars that would fade with time. Seth's breathing deepened, color returning to his face as his body recognized it was no longer fighting a losing battle. He'll sleep for a day or two, Alucard said, cleaning his blade. When he wakes, he'll be weak but whole. Keep him hydrated, fed. His metabolism will demand significant calories as he recovers. Sue's thank you was barely a whisper, but Alucard heard it clearly. Leah Clearwater's treatment followed the same pattern, though she remained conscious through most of it. Her screams echoed through the house raw and primal, until finally her body's natural defenses won out over the corruption. She collapsed back onto the bed, drenched in sweat, but breathing easier. That sucked, she managed, her voice hoarse. Considerably, Alucard agreed. But you're alive. Try to rest. Outside, Sam and Billy waited with the rest of the pack. The tension had shifted from hostile to cautiously respectful. Alucard had just saved 2 of their own, using methods they didn't understand and probably wouldn't approve of. But the results spoke louder than philosophy. They'll recover, Alucard said. The demon that wounded them is still out there, and it's only getting stronger. I need to find it before it attacks again. We've been trying, Jacob said. It's like hunting a ghost. No scent trail, no pattern to its movements. It just appears, strikes, and vanishes. Because it's not moving through normal space. Demons of sufficient power can slip between dimensions, existing partially in our world and partially in the void they come from. Alucard turned toward the forest, his expression distant. But every time they manifest to attack, they leave traces. Psychic resonance, emotional echoes. It's been feeding here for weeks, growing fat on fear. There will be a center point, a place where the veil between worlds is thinnest. Alice's vision suddenly made sense, the fragmentation, the inability to track futures. The demon existed in multiple probability states, simultaneously making precognition useless. But it still needed an anchor point in the physical world. Show me everywhere it's attacked, Alucard said. Every location, every victim. I'll find the pattern. They mapped it out over the next hour, attack sites, citing reports areas where people reported unusual feelings of dread or wrongness. Alucard studied the pattern, his mind working through geometric possibilities and supernatural mechanics. There, a convergence point, approximately 3 miles into the national forest, equidistant from all major attack locations. A place where the boundaries between worlds had worn thin from repeated demonic passage. I'm going hunting, he announced. Alone. This thing has learned to avoid groups to strike at isolated targets. I'll give it what it expects. That's suicide, Paul objected. Even you can't fight something you can't see coming. I don't need to see it coming. I just need to make myself irresistible bait. Alucard's smile was sharp and cold. Demons feed on fear. They're drawn to it like moths to flame. And I've spent the last 3 nights in the presence of the Volturi, some of the most genuinely frightening beings in existence. I'm practically marinated in their psychic residue. This demon won't be able to resist. Sam studied him for a long moment. You're using yourself as bait. Correct. And if it's stronger than you think, if it can actually kill you, then you'll have one less variable to worry about. Alucard turned toward the forest. But I wouldn't bet on that outcome if I were you. He walked into the trees without waiting for permission or backup. Behind him, he heard Sam organizing the pack into a perimeter pattern, ready to intervene if needed, but smart enough to give him room to work. The forest at night was a cathedral of shadows and rain. Alucard moved through it with purposeful casualness, making no effort to hide his presence. Every supernatural sense he possessed was extended, searching for the telltale distortion that marked demonic activity. It found him 2 hours later in a clearing where the moonlight couldn't penetrate the canopy, The thing that emerged from between the trees wore human shape the way a child might wear a Halloween costume, approximately correct, but fundamentally wrong, in ways that triggered every survival instinct. Its proportions shifted as it moved, limbs extending and contracting, features rearranging themselves as if reality couldn't quite decide what it was looking at. But the eyes. The eyes were exactly as Sam had described. Empty voids that reflected nothing, absorbed everything, promised oblivion. "Hello," Alucard said conversationally. "I believe you've been hunting in my absence." The demon's mouth opened, revealing too many teeth arranged in patterns that hurt to observe. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that bypassed ears and spoke directly to the brain. "Hunter, we watched you leave, waited for the protectors to weaken, fed on their fear, their pain, their delicious despair. How very patient of you, but you made a mistake." Alucard drew the casole and jackal in smooth, practiced motions. "You attacked children. That makes this personal." The demon laughed, the sound like breaking glass and screaming birds. It lunged with impossible speed, reality bending around its passage as it attempted to slip between dimensions mid-attack. Alucard was faster. The castle's first shot caught its center mass blessed silver and mercury core, forcing it to solidify fully in physical space. The demon shrieked, the sound resonating across multiple frequencies, some of which could shatter glass. The jackal's shot came half a heartbeat later, punching through the creature's skull and detonating with enough force to spray ichor across the surrounding trees. But demons didn't die easily. The thing reformed, pulling itself back together from scattered pieces. Its empty eyes blazing with genuine rage, now rather than casual hunger. It launched another attack, and this time Alucard met it head-on. The fight was vicious and brief. Claws that could tear through steel met skin that had survived worse. Teeth that dripped dimensional poison bit down on flesh that had learned to weaponize pain. The demon was strong, far stronger than the minor entities Alucard had eliminated previously. It wasn't strong enough. Alucard's hands closed around the demon's throat, or the approximate location where a throat should be in something that kept shifting forms. His grip was iron, holding the creature in place, while his blood seeping from a dozen minor wounds began to corrode its essence. "You chose the wrong hunting ground," Alucard said softly. "This place is under my protection now, and I am considerably less forgiving than the Cullens." The demon thrashed, trying to slip away into its dimensional refuge. But Alucard's blood had contaminated its anchor point, sealing it fully into physical reality. It was trapped, and it knew it. "Any last words?" Alucard asked. The demon's response was a curse in a language that predated human civilization, a promise of return and revenge that echoed with the weight of genuine prophecy. Alucard smiled. "I'll be waiting." He tore the demon's head from its body with brutal efficiency, then burned both pieces with blessed fire until nothing remained but ash that the rain quickly washed away. The forest fell silent. Even the usual night sounds had stopped, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Alucard holstered his weapons and walked back toward the reservation. Behind him, the anchor point where dimensions had worn thin began to heal, reality reasserting itself now that the corrupting presence had been eliminated. Sam met him at the boundary line, the rest of the pack arrayed behind him. They'd heard the gunshots, the screaming, the final silence. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but Alucard could smell their relief. "It's done," he said simply. "The demon is dead. Your people are safe. What about other demons? You said there were more." There are always more. But this was the only one that had established a foothold in Forks. The others are still minor, easily eliminated. I'll continue hunting them until the region is clean. Alucard paused. Consider it my contribution to the treaty I just signed with the Volturi, maintaining supernatural balance. Billy Black wheeled forward, studying Alucard with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. You saved my grandson, and Leah Clearwater. That buys you respect, even if it doesn't buy trust. I'll take what I can get. Alucard inclined his head. If you'll excuse me, I should inform the Cullens that it's safe to return, and face Charlie Swan's questions about the noise in the forest. He left the reservation to its celebrations and relief, walking back through the rain-soaked forest toward town. The Cullens would return soon, resume their careful masquerade of normalcy. The shapeshifters would go back to their patrols and their human lives. And Charlie Swan would file another report about strange noises that ultimately led nowhere. The machinery of secrecy would grind on, keeping the supernatural world hidden from the humans who were simultaneously its victims and its justification. Alucard found himself smiling. Volterra had been interesting, true. The Volturi's power, Auro's ancient weariness, Jane and Alec's terrible gifts, all fascinating in their way. But this, the actual work of protecting the boundary between worlds, this was what made existence bearable. Not the politics or the posturing, but the simple act of standing between chaos and the fragile human world. His phone, a recent acquisition to facilitate communication with Helsing, buzzed with an incoming message. Integra's terse communication informed him that the assignment in Forks was officially extended indefinitely. Demonic activity in the region remained above acceptable thresholds, and his presence was deemed necessary until further notice. He typed back a single word: understood. The rain continued to fall over Forks, washing the world clean of evidence and memory. By tomorrow, the demon's attack would be forgotten by most, dismissed as wild animal activity or personal misfortune. The Cullens would return to their golden-eyed existence. The shapeshifters would protect their territory. And Charlie Swan would keep asking questions that no one would answer. Business as usual in a town that had learned to live with monsters. Alucard stood in the rain and let it soak into his coat, his hair, his ancient bones. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the first howl of a wolf on patrol, the sound both warning and reassurance. The game continued. The hunt never ended. And for the first time in decades, Alucard felt something almost approaching purpose. It would do. For now, it would do. Forks returned to its rhythm of rain and routine. But nothing was quite the same. The Cullens came back from Alaska to find their careful balance altered. They'd spent decades perfecting the art of invisibility, of being just strange enough to be interesting, but never so strange as to threaten. Alucard's presence had shattered that illusion. The Volturi now watched them differently, not with suspicion, but with curiosity about what other variables might exist in their territory. The Quileute pack trained harder, pushed further. They'd fought something that couldn't be killed by their usual methods, been saved by a creature they didn't fully trust. It changed them. Made them question what other threats existed beyond vampires and their own tribal legends. Charlie Swan's reports grew thicker, his questions sharper. He couldn't prove anything, but he knew something fundamental had shifted in his town. And in Volterra, Aro sat on his ancient throne and smiled. For the first time in centuries, the world felt unpredictable again. Dangerous, alive. The stranger in the red coat had reminded them all that immortality didn't mean invulnerability and power didn't guarantee control. Some lessons were worth the chaos they created. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.